I would ride my bike from Lakeview, which is a neighborhood in Chicago, to downtown to the Board of Trade building, or across the street from the Board of Trade building, South LaSalle. And one day, taking my usual bike route to my job, I stopped and I noticed my childhood friend, Zhivko, standing outside the post office with a captain's hat. And I hadn't seen Zhivko in a long time because after high school, he had gone to China and had learned the language and became a teacher there. And our lives had just taken like different paths. But I noticed him standing outside the post office. And so I stopped and I was like, what are you doing? Is everything okay? And he was working with a young company started by him, his University of Illinois business program friend, Devay, and Devay's childhood friend, Drew, had submitted this idea to Y Combinator that made shipping easy for not only small businesses, but at that point, it was more so just anybody. Like the whole idea was that the concept of going to the post office, waiting in line, dropping off a package was inconvenient. So technology can make it more convenient. And Zhivko was standing outside the post office, signing up merchants for this young company or signing up users, regular users, just people like you and me who want to ship, cookies to grandma or Christmas presents to the nieces and nephews for this new company called ShipBob that was going through Y Combinator. And so I would stop and talk to them a little bit every day and kind of get caught up on what they were doing, and seemed really exciting and fun and different, and some very different than anything that I had previously done. And so, at some point they had asked me if I was interested, and I expressed interest in joining ShipBob and being a part of what they were building. None of us knew anything about logistics. They were engineers with a deep background in tech, and this was probably worked to our advantage in the long run, that we didn't have any context on this is how things work in shipping. This is the way that it's always been done and the way you have to do it. So we went about solving the problem of shipping for everyday people with technology. And those were like the earliest days of a company called ShipBob.
So I'm not sure I fully understand the offering of ShipBob in the initial days. So if I was, let's say, wanted to ship my kids birthday cards for the holidays and Christmas gifts, where would ShipBob come in and how would they help me?
Yeah. So this was 2000. So everything was okay. This is when everything was becoming really convenient. So early ShipBob was, I need to ship this coffee mug because it's cool and I bought it for my friend and I want to ship it to my friend in Ohio. I don't have the box. I don't have the tape. I have to go to the post office, tape it up, put a box, and then stand in line and drop it off. So the earliest concept of ShipBob was, I have this and I have my cell phone. I'm going to take a picture of this. When you take a picture of this utilizing the ShipBob app, it dispatches a courier to your location, pick it up, we ship it for you, and charge you $5 for the trouble.
So to have someone drive to this location, package it, and ship it, obviously I'm sure the customer would pay for the shipping label in addition to the $5, but it was a flat $5 fee?
That was the earliest model, yeah.
What type of growth do you guys experience?
We experienced good growth because we hustled our asses off and signed up as many human beings as possible, but it gained no relevant traction in the sense that we were not focusing at the right market that eventually became our market at the time. The thinking was, okay, people need to ship products, but the fact is that people don't ship all that much. We don't ship things through the mail that much. We buy things from retailers and e-commerce stores, but we don't ship things through the mail. So we got enough traction to have respectable numbers of users, and it didn't really gain any traction, consistent reoccurring revenue, until we started focusing on small business owners. More specifically, this new phenomenon at the time of Shopify, BigCommerce, Squarespace merchants that utilize these platforms to take an inspired idea, create a product, and have a respectable looking website up in 2 hours and a verifiable payment gateway. That was a new phenomenon back then, and these merchants proved to be our earliest adopters in a way that was consistent.
So I'm just, was there a subscription fee that they would pay in addition to the $5 cost? Because I can't imagine $5 would cover any of the costs associated with that.
No, we changed it after. Yeah, so we changed it. Once we started to move away from, me and you shipping cookies to grandma and started focusing on small businesses, the pricing also evolved. So there was still a $5 pickup fee, but we would also mark up the cost of postage. First, it was just marking it up straight regular rates from the post office, FedEx, UPS. But after a while, we were shipping regularly now because we were picking up from small businesses. We were able to establish our own accounts with these carriers and negotiate price breaks because of our volume discounts. And then we just started capturing that arbitrage between the shipping price that we charge merchants and the actual price that it cost us. And that added a little bit of margin. Again, it wasn't a healthy business. I mean, it was a fast growing business, but the unit economics still were terrible, but they were moving in the right direction because of those evolutions.
And I'm assuming it was nowhere near profitable.
No.
Okay. So when you met these, what was their first names again?
Drew, DeVay, and Zhivko.
So when you met them, and they asked you to come on to be a co-founder of ShipBob, what exactly did they have in mind your role to be?
So they were younger. They're younger by me by at least a couple of years. I think a couple of them are even more than a couple of years. So to them, I was somebody who had been around the business world enough that had the context of not only how, things work in regards to like money and finance, but I've also been in positions where I've had to sell and I've sold successfully. And so at that point, there was standing a company up from nothing into something is just such a big effort. And you can't do everything yourself. And so when I came on board, I literally hit the streets. I would walk down the major avenues of Chicago, Milwaukee Avenue, Halsted Street, going into small shops that had, small retail stores that also had businesses that they sold online. And I would walk in there and I would look around and I would tell them, hey, you hired this person to work the floor and to sell your products at the front of the house, but they're spending 60% of their day or sometimes even more in the back room packaging your e-commerce orders. How about we dispatch a courier on a daily basis, pick up your e-commerce orders, so the person that you've hired who's currently packaging all these orders and putting on labels and probably making a lot of mistakes can focus on what you hired them to do. And that's how we started to build major traction. Your e-commerce, you focus on your retail operation.
Did you have part of the offering, you would go to a small business and if they didn't have an online presence, would you offer to build them an online presence and manage their logistics?
This is where usually these smaller retailers weren't building HTML websites anymore. That is, back then that was $60,000 or $40,000. They were starting to catch wind that, hey, I can go with this company Shopify where they have these templates for me to build a really cool looking website. So at ShipBob, and this is where our engineering talents became so valuable, we basically created an integration with Shopify. First it was eBay, because a lot of the people that we would pick up from were power eBay sellers. And then after that, we started linking up with Shopify because we were seeing a lot of Shopify merchants. Those integrations allowed for, as orders came through the e-commerce store, they would filter in to it wasn't even a UMS back then, but our app, our warehouse management system. We would see those orders. They would arrive because we were still picking up from couriers at that point. They would arrive and we would match up the order ID that we saw on our screens with the order ID that were on each of the orders. Because the merchants would put in little packing slips on each order and we would be able to scan that and be like, okay, this order is going to Susie Howe in Omaha, Nebraska. And we would organize it that way.
You guys are like one of the first integrations with Shopify.
Probably. Yeah.
And then when did it transition into what ShipBob is today and how did that happen?
Well, I went to New York about 6 months in because we had started to develop a pretty good roster of reoccurring merchants in Chicago. And in March of 2000, I left Chicago to go to New York to open up our first facility or our first operation. It wasn't even a facility, our first packaging facility outside of Chicago. And Drew came with me for like the first month or so. And we went to New York and we started meeting with merchants. We would scrape Shopify merchants off the internet, get their email addresses and mail them to set up meetings. And then Drew and I would go out and meet with these merchants at their homes or at the coffee shop and say, hey, we've got this service called ShipBob. We'll dispatch a courier. We'll take care of your Shopify orders. You don't have to worry about it. You just pay us $5 and the cost of postage. And at some point in enough of these meetings, I would talk to merchants and they would say, your pickup service, and we were doing this at the same time, like people were signing on and we were picking up packages from their office. We had couriers going all around New York City, Brooklyn, Queens, and I'm sure you know how messy that could get. And it was logistically challenging. It was what I personally was stuck in traffic probably hundreds of times, and we would chase postal trucks. We would even break into the post office one time. We jumped the fence and broke into the post office to make sure that the packages that we said that would get out by 5 o'clock that day, but because of traffic and other delays, we weren't able to get them on the truck. We jumped the fence at the post office and ran through the back door. They caught us and said that this was a federal offense, and if we do this again, busted. But I went into enough of these merchant meetings with e-commerce merchants, and they said, you know what? It's cool what you guys do, but it's kind of inconvenient because your couriers come by at times that I may not be home, or I may not be at the WeWork that I work out of. And I like to go to meetings too, and I don't like sitting around and waiting for them. Tell you what, if you take the inventory out of my living room or out of my garage and probably save my relationship or save my marriage, because my partner's about to kill me, because New York apartments are really small, and they were housing like pallets of products inside their living rooms. And they're like, you know what? If you can take all my inventory off my hands, store it somewhere, and fulfill my orders on location, I will give you all my business. And that for us was the light bulb moment where we were like, maybe we should get a warehouse. Let's find a warehouse and start storing customer products there. It's better for us because we don't have couriers driving around the city picking up packages. It's better for our merchants because it's a lot more convenient of a service when they don't have to bother with it. And so that was the light bulb moment where we are shipping for small to mid-sized e-commerce businesses by warehousing, packing, and shipping their products as their orders come in.
That's fascinating. I mean, hindsight's 2020, but was there no company offering fulfillment services? And when you would reach out to different merchants or business owners, tell them about your service, they're like, I don't understand why I would use you guys versus just handing all my products off to a third-party logistics and they handle it by themselves.
Well, yeah. Good question. There was a competitor called Ship, SHYP. They were heavily backed by Silicon Valley. And in the early days, we kind of saw them as our competitor, but they raised $40 million early on from like Kleiner Perkins and such. And I don't want to go into why they didn't succeed, but the long short of it is that they never changed their strategy. When you raise so much money for an idea early on, it's very hard to going back to say those people who gave you $40 million and say, hey, we're going to change strategy about how we do things and evolve into this, because you spent most of your time trying to validate the large investment that they gave you money for originally. And I think that was Ship's problem, is that they maintained that pickup delivery service and where they were dispatching couriers. And it was a neat idea that worked very well in San Francisco, but it didn't really work that well outside of San Francisco, where people weren't as tech savvy and app focused, etc. But for us, one of the phenomenons of the time was that these small business owners that had Shopify stores and eBay stores and BigCommerce stores, they weren't desired clients by 3PLs. 3PLs wanted to work with legacy businesses that they knew had large amounts of volume and a lot of work for their team to do and a big invoice at the end of the month. These merchants would go to maybe a local 3PL and say, hey, we've grown 300 month over month for the last 4 months, and now we've gotten to a point where we can't fulfill our own orders. We need to work with the 3PL. And the 3PL would be like, sorry, not interested. We'd rather be working with Tide or a bigger company that has both retail and e-commerce presence. That was the thinking back then, and that was the opportunity for ShipBob. 3PLs considered these merchants cookie crumbs. Our calculation with is that these cookie crumbs, this phenomenon of e-commerce merchants, would turn out to be a really big cookie one day. And we were right about that. And so we catered our entire value proposition to servicing this generation of merchants.
So going from opening up your first fulfillment center in New York, how long afterwards before you guys started to expand nationwide?
So we opened our first fulfillment center in New York. At first, it was an old studio that was like maybe, I don't know, 800, 900 square feet. But then when that light bulb moment came and we realized by inventorying merchants' inventory, we moved to our first fulfillment center in a place called Industry City in Brooklyn, which today is wonderful and new and some of the sexiest real estate in New York. Back then, it looked like a war zone with like cats, stray cats everywhere, and construction, scary, big, cavernous place. But for us, it was cheap real estate. And so with the early success of that fulfillment center filling up, we started to see the writing on the wall pretty quickly. And soon after, I left to go open our first fulfillment center in Los Angeles. And again, for context, and sorry, it's all a little bit long-winded, Amazon had yet to make the mainstream thinking that you had to have multiple fulfillment centers to reach the population of the United States within 1 or 2 days. So we went to go open in Los Angeles, not because we needed another fulfillment center to house clients' inventory that were not based on the West Coast, but because we thought the next largest aggregation of e-commerce merchants were in Los Angeles, and that was a place for us to open up. Because the thinking was at that point in 2000 was that merchants want to feel close to their inventory. They don't want to send it to some 3PL in Kentucky if they live in Los Angeles. They want to be able to inspect goods as they come in and feel. That was the thinking then. And it was true to an extent that merchants felt comfortable using a 3PL for the first time, being able to get in their car, drive over there and check on it in real time.
So when you started to open up fulfillment centers, were you guys running the original ShipBob business model simultaneously, or did you guys drop that immediately and then pursue fulfillment centers full?
It was side by side for a little bit, and then it got phased out ultimately when we, at some point, like maybe a few months into the Los Angeles experience of building a fulfillment center, we told all of our clients we're no longer doing pickups. You can send us your inventory, but we're not dispatching couriers. Because I do believe that at least initially in Los Angeles, the thinking was we would have a hybrid of warehousing and couriers. But that was soon phased out both in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles.
And did you guys have investors early on that you guys had to kind of tell them that you're pivoting away from what they originally invested in? Or did you guys, fully fund this and bootstrap this from the onset?
Yeah. We didn't bootstrap it. We came out of Y Combinator in the summer of 2000. And so there was Y Combinator money, which, they kind of let you express your business model. They seemed to be kind of hands off, letting us kind of find our own destiny. And then there were some websites back then where regular people you and I could invest in startups by putting in like 5 or 3, and then they would create an LLC and come into the company as everybody would be under the LLC, one big investor. And so there was a little bit of that money too, but we came out of Y Combinator with I think just over $1 million in financing. So there wasn't much money, but there also really wasn't anyone telling us, okay, you can't pivot or you shouldn't pivot. We were kind of figuring it out on our own.
And then fast forward, ShipBob becomes one of the biggest nationwide 3PLs and COVID hits. And I'm curious, in the beginning of COVID, it was doomsday for everybody and nobody knew exactly how things would play out. And you and I both know for e-commerce that put us ahead of our times by at least 5 years. But do you remember when, March hit and things started to shut down, what you guys were thinking, what was going to happen with ShipBob?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a scary time for everybody on the planet. Our focus was on understanding what the situation was that was going on. And then the seriousness of the situation hit us in the sense that if everybody's going to be working from home or staying from home, it's our time to step up and make sure that these products get to the people, one, who need them, but that the businesses who rely on us to get these packages out and can maintain economic vibrancy during a time of potential economic contraction, because nobody knew what was going to happen, was important to us. What was important was our moment. It was going to be our moment, and it had to be our moment. And there was a lot of responsibility for us at that time. So once we realized that, our operations team had already been matured to a certain extent. We had gone through Series A, B, and C, I think, up until that point. So we had hired some industry professionals. But most important thing was that as a company, we realized that we had to go above and beyond that to make sure that we have safe environments from which to do fulfillment so that the business can continue. Responsibilities we have to our merchants and our merchants to their customers, et cetera, et cetera. So we were probably one of the first fulfillment companies that had 24-hour cleaning crews, temperature machines. We mobilized that as quickly as possible. And we were listening to different industry experts and health experts to figure out, okay, these are the things that you need to do. We didn't shutter the doors and say, let's wait and see what happens. We said, hey, let's get to work and do everything possible to make it to continue the business and to continue executing the act of fulfillment on behalf of these businesses.
So getting to know you over this conversation, it's very evident that sustainability has always been something that piqued your interest. And as the velocity of e-commerce shot up, especially accelerated through COVID, you started to realize that this is not a viable option for the environment and there has to be an alternative. And from when you had that, I'm sure it was in the back of your mind and you were keeping track of it, but then ultimately decided that you have to take the next step to potentially open up your own company that's sustainably friendly to the environment for fulfillment. How long from, I guess, what was the research period? How long was the due diligence period until you guys decided to, okay, Manifest is opening up tomorrow?
Yeah, I had a pretty high conviction for a long time. I knew our industry was a waste intensive industry. I had been there on the front lines with our operations teams everywhere that I worked outside of Chicago. And so I remember the amount of trash that fills up dumpsters. And I had many experiences with myself and the team all jumping into the dumpsters together to pound down the trash as low as possible so that we can put more trash in it. And it constantly amazed me that so much had changed in the 6 or 7 years that I had been in e-commerce. Tools, we were talking about earlier in early integration with Shopify. Now Shopify 6 years later had a whole ecosystem developed to just servicing Shopify. So much had changed, but why was fulfillment done the same way that it was done 25 years ago for the most part? There's elements of robotics, but people should realize that it takes a massive amount of scale to implement those robots in a way that's both operationally and economically viable. So there has been robotics, but fulfillment was still being done the same way. And I remember walking around a fulfillment center. Every single thing in here at some point is going to end up in the trash. Whatever timeline you choose, 6 months, 4 years, whatever. Everything here is going to the trash. And it's really sad that these vessels that take packages from point A to point B really will have no other purpose outside of that action, and that it goes straight to the trash. And you kind of start going deeper down the rabbit hole and you realize, well, no one's even taking our trash anymore. So this stuff is going straight into the ocean. And let's look at the stuff that we're using on these packages. People don't realize something as simple as the plastic tape that's around 99% of the packages that arrive at our doors. The compounds of that tape can take up to 5 years to biodegrade. Polymailers, traditional, regular, standard polymailers take 22 to 25 years to biodegrade. Nobody was really thinking about this, but with the explosion of e-commerce over the last 15 years, and then the massive acceleration during COVID, where now we lived in a world where somebody like my 70-year-old mother was very comfortable ordering everything, including groceries, online because of COVID. The world had changed, and the velocity of e-commerce had increased so much, but still had the velocity of the amount of waste that we produce. And so it was pretty obvious to me that this was a problem worth solving and a problem that needed to solve. And so I founded Manifest with two of my partners, Max Stevens and Bob Sixsmith, to lead the change towards sustainability and fulfillment in e-commerce, to show basically the rest of the industry that there is a better way, and a way to be both economically prosperous, but also socially and environmentally responsible as a business. And that's the premise and the North Star of Manifest.
So when I heard about Manifest and then, who founded the company, my first question was, if sustainability is so important and the fulfillment sector in general is not environmentally friendly, then why go and open Manifest and not just transform ShipBob, who was one of the leading 3PLs in the industry, to also take on the role of being the leading experts in sustainable fulfillment?
Yeah, great question. ShipBob is a phenomenal company, an amazing company that really pioneered an industry from, where it was 10 years ago to where it is today. But that wasn't our DNA. Our DNA was tech, and we created a quantum leap at ShipBob in e-commerce technology and fulfillment technology and the value proposition that's available to merchants. You now live in a world where merchants who are maybe shipping a couple thousand orders a month have a logistics network comparable to what only 10 years ago massive retailers would have. So that was our focus. That was our DNA. We didn't spend too much time thinking about these other byproducts of our industry, because our focus was on creating value for this new generation. Now it's the standard generation of e-commerce merchants, and building tech that made the connections between their stores, their customers, and their fulfillment closer and closer and closer. So it's just a different focus, for me, I'd been in the industry long enough to feel like this was an unacceptable legacy. So much prosperity had occurred in the last 10 years in e-commerce. I feel like if more people and more merchants and more consumers knew about what the byproduct of this prosperity was, that they would urge me to go on the path to create another branch of the fulfillment value proposition that is showing the industry and leading the way to show like, okay, it can be done sustainably. It can be done without plastics. You can offset the carbon impact. You can only use biodegradable and curbside material, curbside recyclable material, things that Manifest does. And as a business, we're doing fantastically well. Our growth has been fantastic. We've had 100% client retention in the 2.5 years that we've been in business, and we've done it all in a way that's sustainable. And that to us has created a closer relationship with the people that we serve, our merchants, and a closer relationship between our merchants and their customers who are buying these products online.
Do you guys have specific brands that you work with? Like, let's say if the brand is not so sustainable, not so good for the environment, does that matter? Or as long as they're, you guys are offering them at least a better fulfillment option?
We're offering them a better fulfillment option, but we also act as their advisor. There have been numerous clients that have come to us. Just one example. I have dozens of examples, but there's this one client came to us, sells baby clothes, hundreds a day, packages going out the door. When those baby clothes used to come into our facility from the manufacturer, each SKU would be in a plastic bag with a sticker on it so that you can barcode it and scan it. And this entrepreneur wanted to be like, how can I change this? You guys are, I wouldn't say experts because there are people who dedicate their career. They should be called the experts, but you guys are on the cutting edge of fulfillment solutions. How can I make this part of my business more sustainable? So, and this was really early on. We went on a hunt to be like, okay, what's a plastic substitute that you can put as basically a casing for little baby clothes? And we settled on glycine. Glycine is made from materials in the ocean. It's biodegradable. It's a lot different than plastic. It's a lot more environmentally friendly than plastic. Now, all of the shipments that come from the manufacturer to us are in these glycine bags. Changes like that, advice and advisement that we give to merchants are also a learning experience for us. Now, when new merchants come to us and ask the same question, we know the answer. But I expect us to get questions that we've never looked for the answer to, that makes us go out there and find new answers. So it's a journey and it's a collective journey, but merchants want to do the right thing. Merchants want to be on the right side of history. Merchants want to make their consumers happy. People want a more sustainable planet and more sustainable solutions to their online shopping. Who doesn't? We all have that feeling of guilt, have had that feeling of guilt at some point when on the afternoon we have to take out the recycling. We go bring it out into the street and the lid is up on the recycling bin because we had gotten so many packages in the past week that it's like embarrassingly high. Nobody likes that feeling and it feels wasteful. So slowly but surely we're changing that and we're fully dedicated to making sure that like in 3 years, 4 years, of waste that's produced in fulfillment has a place to be put that either allows it to be reused or biodegraded, but doesn't sit around on a planet for another 50 years.
When you run a company that's constantly trying to learn on better ways to fulfill orders for the environment, you also subconsciously become a lot more conscious of, what you purchase and how you go about your day-to-day life. And, we have the simple things of plastic bags at the grocery shop. Are there any other particular, activities or habits that you've taken on that are different than what you used to do because of
Yeah. I mean, dozens. Packing peanuts. Terrible for the environment. There's better substitutes. A lot of the stuff that was right-sized packaging, no brainer. A lot of these solutions are just easy, common sense solutions that the industry just has been maybe too slow or too lazy to start implementing. But right-sized packaging, we've all had that experience in which we order something small from Amazon or whatever retailer and it comes in a refrigerator-sized box and you're like, why? And it has 2 plastic packaging pillows in there or like 4 plastic packaging pillows. You're like, this is ridiculous. Right-size the packaging. It's better for the merchant because they end up paying less for the postage. It's better for the environment and it's better for the mail system. You're taking less space on these mail trucks, which are already being fire hosed by, consistently record volumes.
And I always like to end the podcast with asking our guests 2 questions. The first question is, what's your favorite quote and why does that quote specifically resonate with you?
Put me on the spot. I didn't know that you were going to ask that. Favorite quote. There's so many amazing quotes. It's kind of like when somebody asks you what's your favorite movie and you want to give them like 3 or 4 or 5 answers. What's yours?
My favorite quote If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And it's a tribute to mindset, which, everything is truly about mindset.
Yeah. I would say I don't know my favorite quote off the top of my head, or maybe it's that it's a Monday and I've been talking since 8 a.m. this morning, but it would be somewhere along the lines of what you're saying. Wayne Dyer, his books are something that I've enjoyed for years now, and he has a lot of quotes similar to what you said about what Henry Ford said, which is whether you think you can or you can't, it's up to you, you know? So probably something that Wayne Dyer would have said. If I could go through a list, I can probably pick out which one speaks to me the most. But along the lines of your favorite quote, I agree with that. It's a good one.
Fantastic. And if you won the lottery tomorrow and money was no object, I'm not saying that manifest was more of a money decision than it is a sustainability decision, but aside from the world of business, what would you spend your days doing?
Well, my first thought was, would you still continue to build Manifest? And the answer is yes. I would write Manifest a $50 million check tomorrow and start basically advancing the scalability that we have to kind of right now take step by step as a young business building toward being a bigger business. That would be fantastic. And Menachem, that raising money, never easy. Even when it seems like it should be easy, it's never easy. So yeah, it would be wonderful. If I didn't have to, if I wasn't still building Manifest, how would I spend my days? I think public service is super important and something that the last few generations of Americans have kind of not deprioritized as of how they spend their time or what they dedicate their workable hours to. So I would find some role for myself in public service. Could be something as small as like a school board or running for local political office. But I think it's important for people to realize that our society needs people who care in positions of responsibility. Otherwise, you get what we have today, which is, you look everywhere in politics, both on a state level, but especially on a federal level. These guys are idiots, and it's
Oh, yeah.
terrible. And any one of us can like look to the next like five people closest to us in their life and pretty much with confidence conclude that any one of us would do a better job than the people that we see in Washington, D.C. running things. It's just that nobody's really thinking about that as a career path, except for the types of people who end up doing the type of stuff that we see in Washington today, like really petty politicking and hypocrisy. It's really sad to see, and I hope that changes. So I would try to find a role for myself in public service.